Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Yes, I truly am so conservative that I can't turn left when I'm driving. And I'm really proud of that fact as well. For those of you who are newly joining us, I suppose it still requires a word of warning that this may not be a safe space for you if you're offended by having your ideas challenged. This is broadcast number 100. Yes, that is, Ron, 100. And this week,
this is
Jason
100.
100, our 100th broadcast. Joins us again as we talk about sharing with the Cults Deux. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Winter Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast if he is able to do so.
Right. I was able to do it a few minutes ago, and now I'm looking at this, and I have no idea where it is. But I'm going to try it anyways. Our readings from sunny Florida, which is not sunny right now, thanks to Tropical Storm Alberta, which appears to have knocked out my internet at home. So I'm at a different location now. Let's see what you get. Oh, that's not good, is it?
Well, no. Something.
That's... What are you getting?
It's black. It's a black screen.
Black screen. Oh, well. Okay. Well, that's not, those aren't our commercials, are they?
No.
It's apparently presented by Outer Darkness.
Yes, that's, it's happened before. Well, you know what? I was able to do it a few minutes ago. I'm working on a laptop. I'll get back to you guys.
Okay.
Okay.
And in the meantime, we're going to reintroduce Jason Oakes while we're busy trying to figure out how all of this technology works when it's not working. I was sharing with Jason. This has been a technology difficult day. He was having a hard time getting the proper internet. Ron is. For me, it's been printing that's been an issue. Microsoft's been busy doing updates, which makes nothing work very well. So I don't get that. Anyway, Jason is authored a book. We had him on previously, and the title of the book is Sharing with the Cults. And one of the first questions we asked you last time, but we want to reiterate it again, is why another book on cults?
Well, I feel like a lot of the books that are on cults give a lot of great descriptions about their beliefs, their history, and some of the things about them, but they don't do a whole lot to help you reach out to them with the gospel. And they become very confrontational at times, maybe even leaving believers with the us versus them. They're kind of weird mentality. I need to stay away from them. Whereas mine, I wanted to try and help believers say, I can reach out to them with the gospel in spite of not knowing much about them, and helping them to do that.
Okay. So in spite of not knowing much about the gospel.
About the cults, not the gospel.
I'm glad you clarified that, because I was going to go for a Joel Osteen question. Was the pastor of a very large church and didn't seem to know what the gospel was when asked on air about that. So that would be a problem. What do you think would be the most surprising group that you talk about in your book?
I would say the New Apostolic Reformation. There's a few groups in the book that I included and took them out, and included and took them out as I was going through the process. And what it really came down to is the whole practice of mind control. A friend of mine named Michael Bohm, he does youth apologetics training podcasts, and he's based out of Colorado. He actually used to be a youth pastor within that movement. And he was doing a sermon with the youth group on characteristics of a cult, and came to the conclusion, whoa, my church fits pretty much all of these. And after that lesson, the pastor called him in, gave him a reaming, and told him that every one of his lessons he was going to do needed to be run through him. Ooh. And so it was about a year after that point where he just turned to his wife, said, I can't do this anymore. And the week after they left, the entire sermon was based off of just slamming him and his wife. and telling everybody in the church that they're not to talk to them, that he's, false shepherd, all of that. And so he has personal experience within that movement. So I've talked a lot with him, listened to a lot of his material, as well as some other sources. And so that would be the most surprising, because there's probably a lot of Christians who are part of this group who don't even know that they're a part of the group, that never heard that term. And as we go to describe some of the teachings, they'll flat out deny. I had that experience recently with another pastor that's within my region. He attended Bethel Church, satellite campus of theirs, before coming to pastor. And I kind of sat down and grilled him a bit and concluded, okay, you're fine. But his wife was swearing up and down, no, they don't believe that. They don't teach that. We never heard that. I don't know what you're talking about. And so it's one of those things that is thrown around within the leadership and the books that are put out by these guys, but they kind of keep it under wraps and even kind of weirdly deny its even very existence.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Michael Brown. Now, by the way, Bethel. When you say Bethel Church, you probably need to clarify, because there are a number of different Bethel churches out there. This is Bethel Church,
Redding, California. Yeah, Redding, California.
Yep, Bill Johnson. Michael Brown, Dr. Michael Brown, who's phenomenal on Messianic Judaism and that sort of thing, but for some reason that I can't quite put my finger on, when it comes to anything that seems to be Pentecostal, he defends to the death.
Yes, I heard him. Actually, one of the guys I keep a close eye on, Dr. Michael Heiser, and listening to his podcast, I was surprised that he had Holly Pivec on to talk about the NAR. And then the week after, he basically threw her under the bus by having Dr. Brown on, and he just flat out denied everything that Holly said. And like I said, just almost basically denying the existence of this entity. And it was really weird.
He has this kind of odd argument that it's been a long time since I've heard anything quite like this. It kind of goes, now, by the way, I need to hastily point out, we're not talking about charismatic Pentecostal versus non-charismatic. We're not talking about cessationism versus continuationism. We're talking about heresy versus orthodoxy. And the NAR tends to fall in the area of heretical. So having said that, Michael Brown has this kind of an interesting argument I've heard him do and or write, which goes like this. There's no such thing as the NAR. But if there was such a thing as the NAR, no one's claiming to be an apostle. But if they were claiming to be an apostle, no one's claiming to be an inspired inerrant apostle like the first century. But if they were claiming to be an inspired inerrant apostle like the first century, they're not claiming that what they're doing is equal to or superior to what the first century apostles did. But if they did claim that, they've never done it when I was present. And if they did it when I was president, I was probably not in earshot because I didn't hear them claim that. And nor have they written it in their books. But if they did write it in their books, I've never read those particular books. Therefore, there is no NAR.
You know, I never knew what the statement "thou doth protest too much" means until now. I don't think.
I mean, isn't that basically his argument, as you've heard it, Jason? That's what I hear him saying.
Yes, very, very similar to that. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, well, they kind of maybe do believe that, but not the way that it's presented. And yeah, that sounds about right.
Right. And so, you know, you say, he says, well, they never said X. And so you quote from their book. Well, here's what they said. Well, okay, I never read that. So they couldn't have meant it. Well, but they wrote it. And because you didn't read it doesn't mean they didn't mean it. It just means you didn't read it.
I'm ignorant, therefore it doesn't exist.
Yeah. And you know, that's too bad because he's smarter than that. He knows how to, he understands philosophy. He understands, you know, how to dissect these things, and yet he refuses to do so. He has a blind spot when it comes to this, which kind of brings us back to the whole issue of cults and how to talk with people in cults. Because even though I don't know if the NAR is a cult, I'm not saying it is, it's false teaching, clearly. But isn't it the case that people in cults and false teaching have a blind side that they seem to be incapable of accessing?
Yes, and that's where the whole mind control issue comes in with these groups. And the reason why I ended up including the NAR in the book was because of the people who have come out of the group, and they've talked about their experience and what's happened to them as a result, what their experience was while they're in the group, and kind of when they had that eye-opening moment, realizing in hindsight the control that the group had on them, to such an extent that one of the classic teachings of most of these groups is that we're the kind of the one true church, and the NAR definitely has that feel about it, to the extent that if you're thinking about moving to a place that doesn't have a NAR church, they worry about your safety, they worry about your spiritual life, and basically kind of make you believe that bad things are going to happen to you if you leave the group, if you step out of your covering, if you stop attending in our church, things of that nature. The leaders are to not be questioned. The theology behind it is not to be questioned. Even if you're pointing out stuff in the Bible that is directly opposed to something that was said, well, this is modern day revelation type of stuff, so you can't really go against it. So that's the kind of stuff that made me include the NAR in the book.
So let me ask you a question, because you used the word mind control a couple of times, and for some, that creates a whole nother set of points to argue about. Define for those who are watching what you mean by mind control. Are you saying that people are incapable of making decisions, that somehow someone is actually like a puppet just controlling every thought that they have?
No, it's Stephen Hassan's classic bite model in his book, Combating Cult Mind Control, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And so you control somebody's behaviors, you make them completely dependent upon the group, you limit their contact with outsiders, you limit their contact with sources, informational sources, books, and material outside the group, and you tell them that emotions are basically the primary way in which you receive truth, and you scare the daylights out of them on the thought of leaving the group. And
scare the daylights. That's a really important aspect. Now, the way I try to help people understand it is they are still making decisions. They're always making decisions.
Yes.
But we make our decisions based on a worldview that we hold. And so if someone transforms your worldview, which informs your decision making, then you're going to make different decisions.
Yes.
And if you think that the authority that you are with truly represents God,
yes,
and that by questioning that authority, God is going to do something really bad to you, you're going to choose to not rebel. Not because you think they're right or wrong, but because of the big bat that they're using called God.
And the way that the NAR does that is through what they call covering theology. And so the covering theology basically says that everybody has a covering, another person, that they're supposed to submit to. And so wives submit to your husbands, and then people in the church are to submit to the pastor of that church. And then every pastor, they believe, should be submitting to a NAR apostle that is local to their area. And even those NAR apostles are underneath other larger NAR apostles until it gets to the top. And I guess C. Peter Wagner was technically at the top, and then he died. And I'm not sure who occupies that position now. But but the teaching is not just that, you should submit to biblical and godly authority, but basically that person has the right to speak into your life, to make big and small decisions for you. They're not to be questioned. And if you go outside of that covering, then yeah, bad things are going to happen to you.
Well, there's really virtually no difference that I can perceive between what the NAR teaches and what the shepherding, or what was called either the shepherding or discipleship movement back in the 80s into the 90s.
Absolutely.
Well, back into the 70s. It's one and the same when you use terms like covering, when you
see, someone told me I needed a covering, and someone told me I needed a covering. I went and got a quilt.
But you're right. Another group that I cover is the International Church of Christ, which broke out of the mainline denominational Churches of Christ, and they're known as like LA Church of Christ, Boston Church of Christ, Chicago Church of Christ. And they are another one that basically did that. They wanted to emphasize discipleship, went way too far with that, and made it so that the person had the right to dictate every little area of your life. And they moved into the area of a cult.
Very quickly, yeah. Kit McKean, he really did a job. In fact, it was kind of interesting that the mainline Churches of Christ were doing some of the best work on exposing the International Church of Christ as a cult. Trying to think. I have the discipling
discipleship dilemma. Discipling dilemma.
Yeah, which was very good. It's done by a guy out of Pepperdine University, which is a Church of Christ university. And he had done a couple of psychology profiles with them. One of them was he did it twice. The group actually let him do it twice. And the first one was, who was I before I joined the group? And it was this EMFJ, whatever are the letters for your personality types.
Right.
In the ones prior to joining the group, there was a pretty much average spread of personality types that you have in culture generally. When he did the one, what do I think I will be like in a while after being discipled in this group, he discovered everyone was converging on one personality type, which happened to be Kit McKean.
Wow.
So what does that tell you?
Yeah, and that's exactly what mind control looks like in a very real way. Over time, you can hear it in the LDS, though in general conference, most of the speakers have a very sing-songy nature to their talk. And you can hear they all start kind of looking the same, sounding the same, dressing the same. Over time, that's what happens. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
To some extent, that's cultural. I mean, these denominations, they become little mini cultures that they mimic each other because it seems to succeed. Whatever they're doing is successful in their culture. But when you get punished for going outside that norm, that's the problem. It's when you when people come up to you, and this can even happen in an evangelical church, when you kind of color outside the lines, you're not doing it the way they did it in the past. But it becomes especially problematic in these cult groups because you have more than just a little bit of pushback. You get punishment sometimes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And absolutely. And I would say that's a great way to describe mind control is it becomes a culture. It's really the culture of the group is these certain things. This is how we do these certain things. And if there's nothing necessarily sinister that the person who's doing it or the person it's being done to is doing, they most of the time probably have no idea that they're passing on something that is what would be considered mind control.
But somebody is, if it wasn't a cult, or if it wouldn't be a cult if somebody wasn't using this in a sinister fashion. If it was just, in other words, these people at the top know what they're doing. They have this is part of their game plan. They're deliberate. In other words, for them, it's deliberate, but the people down line, they're just, like you said, they're just doing what they've been told, and they think this is God's way of doing it.
Well, even the leadership, I don't know that in all cases the leadership understands what they're doing. Some are so self-deceived that they are just doing what they're doing. Jim Jones, I think, would be a good example of that. I think he really believed his shtick. He was so self-deceived. The problem is he then goes on and deceives others
Right.
because of his self-deception.
Well, I don't see a dichotomy between being self-deceived, in other words, really believing that I am what I claim to be, and using manipulative techniques. In other words, it becomes a case with the leaders of the end justifies the means. Mm-hmm. So this would be wrong. This would be wrong if you did it, but because I'm the leader, I can do it. And I've heard leaders say that. I've heard them do that.
You had a leader that did that.
I had a leader who did that. It was okay for him. When we did it, he always found a problem with it. There was always something wrong with it.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great example of that very thing. That's mind control. That's a type of thing that if there's a different standard for the leadership than there is for the others, then that's one good way of putting it. He had a different standard, and the really weird thing is he would lean back in his. He had this recliner in the room where we met. It was his chair, and he would lean back in it and laugh every once in a while and say, "I love messing with you guys' minds." Now, when your leader can actually say, "I love messing with you guys' minds," and you just keep letting him do it, well, he's got you. You're going to have to figure out a way out. You're fried.
All right, now I'm gonna move slug just to a little bit different subject for a moment, because we have Vernon Steinkamp, who's made quite a few comments in here. Asked, he says that LDS is a business, and as I read that, I thought, okay, it seems to me that the group that you most enjoy engaging with, at least that's your claim, is the LDS.
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, it's how God got a hold of my heart. My best friend growing up was LDS, and that was the first exposure. My leader in my small group, a youth group, gave me the God Makers. I went home trying to understand my friend, and 5 minutes in, I'm thinking I have to talk to my friend. And so then I started learning about what LDS believes so that I can talk to my friend. And then after he became a Christian, came out of the LDS church, then God got a hold of my heart. And so now my friend and I are going out to the Mormon bookstore, getting Mormon doctrine, learning even more. I'm stopping missionaries on the street and, bringing them home. And it kind of just snowballed from there. So, but I would say Mormonism is just utterly fascinating to me. On one level, just because the more you chase the rabbit, the deeper the rabbit hole goes. It's just amazing to me how complex, in a sense, their theology is. How they have so redefined and twisted things to where they can go and turn around and use the Bible to have a comprehensive worldview that is completely separate from the actual Bible.
Well, yes, I most groups that claim to be Christian, though, do the same thing. Now, we started out with Jehovah's Witnesses because my wife had friends on a bowling league that were Jehovah's Witnesses, and she really wanted to reach them. And it's the same problem. Their theology is enormously complex. It doesn't appear that way at first, until you start taking apart what the organization teaches on various topics, like the resurrection, for example. You use the word resurrection, you and I already have a definition to that, right? It's we die, our body is raised, our spirit then it's a composite, let's say. Our spirit rejoins our body. That's the word I was looking for. I'm having these senior moments that are very, very frustrating to me sometimes. With the Watchtower, though, it's a very different idea. Their idea is, and you have to read a number of different documents to get to this, that we don't have a soul, that we are a soul. And that all of your memories that you make, all of your knowledge, everything that makes you you intellectually is contained in your physical body and to some degree in your blood. And that your physical body, when you die, everything that's the original you, your physical body, all of your memories, it's all physical, just ceases to exist, goes to powder and dust, and that's it.
Yep.
And then God creates a new physical body that never existed before, and has a copy of the memories that you had, because the original has ceased to exist. And so from that copy, he makes another copy to put in this new physical body. In other words, you're Xeroxed. You're not really resurrected.
Yeah.
But even the average Jehovah's Witness doesn't realize that.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about the Jehovah's Witnesses is that they believe that our resurrection is going to be physical, but they don't believe Jesus' resurrection was physical.
They don't believe our resurrection is physical either.
Okay, so they wouldn't describe that as physical.
The average Jehovah's Witness thinks it is.
Okay.
But they haven't thought it through. So what we do is we sit down and say, okay, let's look at your documents, and you can tell me where I am going wrong. Okay. And as we read the documents, what we find is that you don't have a soul, you are a soul. That you have a body, which is what we see walking around. You have a life force, which is like electricity. It doesn't take on your personality characteristics. It's like if you plugged in a refrigerator or a computer in the outlet, it only powers it. It doesn't take on any of your personality characteristics. And then you have a life pattern. Your life pattern is all of your memories, experiences, everything that makes you different from somebody else. And so when you die, obviously your body just, that's it. You're unplugged. Your life force unplugged, no longer powering and moving you around. Your original life pattern is contained in your body and in your blood. That's just gone, just dead. And then God creates a new being that looks like you, plugs in your life force like electricity. It doesn't bring any of you with it. It's just electricity.
Okay, I see where you're going with that. Yeah.
So what you're saying, though, is when you say we're not resurrected, or the others are not resurrected physically, other than Christ and the 144,000, you're saying really it's not that it's not a physical resurrection. You're saying it's not a resurrection.
It's not a resurrection. Even Christ wasn't resurrected according to them. They're
recreated.
In fact, no, he was. A new creation was made. He wasn't even recreated. God first created Michael the archangel, who then God unplugged him and plugged into the womb of Mary, and created a new being called Jesus, who's just human. Downloaded Michael's memories into this newly created human named Jesus. And then when Jesus died, he unplugged him, created a new being he now calls Michael, who's in heaven, plugged in that life force into the newly created Michael. So the only connection between them is the power.
And whatever duplication of memories that Jehovah allegedly can do.
They're downloaded, and right. Yeah. So he moves the data from being to being, but it is not their personal experiences.
So really, what's really interesting here is that you have a theology, the Watchtower Jehovah's Witness theology, which is highly rationalistic, and it demands a rational explanation for everything.
Right.
But they don't even try to present a rational explanation for how you can be the same person when at one point you cease to exist, and that all that is left of you is a record of your memories, and that at another point in time, allegedly you, but it's really a new creature is being created and given your memories. How can that really be you?
Right.
So how do they answer? They don't even try to answer that question. They
don't because they don't think about it. And you're right about the Jehovah's Witnesses. They tend to be very more focused on teaching theology. It's bad theology, about teaching theology than Mormons do. Mormons recruit usually by relationships. They don't recruit by saying, by the way, you're going to be a god someday and your wife will be eternally pregnant. That's not a really good way to
eternally pregnant. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and also you said they're more focused on teaching the theology as opposed to questioning it, getting back to the mind control.
Yes.
Or even really trying to understand it. To what extent, I mean, when you go into the realm of Christian books and Christian ministries, it's hard to move around very much before you bump into sermons, seminars, books, whatever, by the truckload, by the boatload, trying to explain the faith to you, trying to help you make sense of it, show you how other Christians in the past have made sense of what the Bible teaches. I know that's conspicuously lacking in Jehovah's Witness literature. They just present it. You're supposed to believe it. Here it is.
It isn't even conspicuously lacking. They tell you up front that, number one, the Bible is only written to the anointed class. It's not written to everyone else. That's why you can't understand it. Number two, therefore, you have to have the anointed class to explain it to you. And you can't think anything differently, because if you do, you're running ahead of Jehovah's organization. And you could be kicked out for thinking independently. In fact, in the 1980s, they had a problem. They had their failed prophecy of 1975, and they were leaving by the droves. And so they started letting people actually do Bible studies in small groups. The result was they lost about 1 million members. And so in 1982, they started a series of articles titled Avoid Independent Thinking. And in there, they have this great quote. It says, there are those who think they can study the Bible alone or in small groups, but strangely, such Bible reading has caused them to believe the false doctrines that pagandom taught 100 years ago. So I have to ask you a question. If you read the Bible alone and you believe what Christendom taught 100 years ago, what are you supposed the Bible teaches?
But I better ask the Watchtower what that means, because I'm probably not qualified to answer that question.
All right, so we're going to try to do a commercial here. So we'll see.
I'm on inferior equipment here, so please bear with me here as I go to our commercial. We have World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. And they have a question. Are you still trying to figure out how to clean up in the ministry business? Do you want to finally learn how to get to the bottom of growing a successful church? Would you like to flush away your failures and start having your best church now? Well, you need Charlatan Ultra Soft, because nothing says theologically soft like Joel Osteen and his Charlatan Ultra Soft. It is personally tested by the man himself. It provides comfort where it counts. It wipes away even the most stubborn orthodoxy, and it comes with a money-back guarantee. Keep those butts in the pews with Charlatan Ultra Soft, available at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. So it's okay. I hit stop.
Okay, you did it. We made it. All right.
All right.
I wish we had our applause thing. We could do that, but they took it away from us.
Yeah, you just go. Okay.
All right. So now that we completely took away, Jason, from what you were saying about why you enjoy engaging with LDS, is my comment that they tend to recruit more based on relationships than theology fairly accurate?
I would say relationships and emotion. When the missionaries come to your door, they come with the Moroni challenge. Pray about this, burning in the bosom, all of that. And if you get the right answer, then great, you get baptized. But if you don't, then we'll keep on modifying.
I would think that now with the whole Me Too movement, the whole burning in the bosom thing is that they're going to have to modify that. They're going to have to find a different way of expressing that, don't you?
The Me Too,
the burning in the bosom. It just seems so politically awkward right now.
Oh, right.
The phraseology.
women accusing men of
Yeah.
being inappropriate.
Let me explain this. Was
Somehow
burning in the
burning
bosom.
in the bosom probably is.
Yeah, I feel very uncomfortable right now using that lingo. But go ahead.
Well,
the emotion. That's the emotional.
Joy. When we were newlyweds, Joy was kind of funny. When we were newlyweds, she said that we had some Mormon missionaries started coming to the door, and she was talked to them, and they started talking about eternal marriage, and she thought, we're newly married. I'd like eternal marriage. And she says now she just knows marriage isn't eternal. It just feels like it's eternal.
Well, there's a lot of racket going on. What is that?
Well,
okay. Well, tell us.
It's fixed.
Okay.
The racket's fixed.
You mentioned the emotional part. What about the relational part?
Well, the relational part is really, they've even actually, you are right, because even the missionary tactics have changed. They are going more online, and they are also not going door to door in the way that they used to. They are basically telling the members of different wards that it's their job to fill the missionaries' calendars. So if they have people that are in their life that they feel like might be open to this, then they'll send their information and their address to the missionaries. Hey, and then they'll go knock on their door, or they'll give them a call, or they'll reach out. So it is becoming more relational, and the social media end of things is another way in which they're becoming more, you could say technological, but also relational in that sense. They're going where people are and where people have conversation and discussion about these types of things. So
they have very often been on the cutting edge in media. They have some really, really talented filmmakers and creators, and have since at least the 1970s.
Is this new tactic proving successful? Are they? How is it affecting their recruitment?
I think they realized that the old method was not as successful anymore, that people were finding it, cumbersome, offensive, irritating for them to come and knock on their door without any kind of reason to. That's why they changed. They also lowered the average missionary, or the missionary age that they can go. And it used to be 19 and I think 20 or something like that for the women, and they lowered it a year so they can go straight out of high school, whereas before they had like a year where they went to BYU and then they went on their mission kind of thing.
I thought I saw a Mormon missionary the other day who had a latchkey around his neck. I mean, I was getting kind of scared.
They're
also encouraging the retired Mormons to go on missions.
Yes, they are. And they're upping the women. There's a lot more women missionaries, sister missionaries, than there were before. They tend to try and keep them in lower profile in safer areas. So like if you go to Temple Square in Salt Lake, you're going to see a lot of sister missionaries there. And here, same thing with Billings and the temple. I see them. I run into them almost every time I go to the Walmart in Billings. There's sister missionaries shopping there.
What do they wear? I've never seen a sister missionary. Do they have a special uniform?
No, the thing with the women is more just like, professional business type of attire, whereas the men have the static, uniform. Okay. Same when you go to church in the LDS ward too. I mean, the men are pretty much all looking the same, and then the women have some variety, but they look essentially the same.
So do you target the Mormon missionaries when you're doing outreach, or do you also target and look for just regular Mormons? Do you try,
I don't target anybody. I do a lot of stuff online now, and it's really whoever I get into conversation with. So that could be a Christian who's believing weird stuff. It could be a person who's an atheist who believes weird stuff, and it could be Christian Science, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness. Whoever I end up being in conversation with, or ends up being offended by something I post.
Okay. So what are you finding with your emphasis on the emphases that you're trying to promote now, what are you finding most successful in witnessing to cultists?
Really just inviting them into a conversation. And rather than getting confrontational right off the bat, taking them at their word. So I kind of mentioned this, that the tactics are based off of the 6 conversations I have all the time. So you hear them say, I'm a Christian too. Well, assume that they follow the teachings of Jesus and just invite them into a conversation about the teachings of Jesus. They say that they have a testimony of the Book of Mormon, take them at their word and invite them into a conversation about the Book of Mormon and show them some stuff that teaches Christian doctrine. They say that they, the grace thing is a little bit different because, they'll, pretty immediately be confrontational on that because if you talk about grace, then they'll start throwing James 2 at you, and then you kind of get right into the conversation. The why should I trust the Bible is really just they talk about an apostasy. I'm just finding in general that asking follow-up questions, inviting them into a conversation, getting straight to the gospel and to Jesus and to the point is really a much more productive tactic than talking about Joseph Smith and polygamy and temple ceremonies and all sorts of others.
Yeah. And you're doing most of this online?
Yes. Facebook has a lot of groups. You can find them pretty easy. And, so I will create videos, on YouTube, and then I'll post them in groups and I'll just throw a question out there related to the video. And it's really there to just, it's a hook sitting there and waiting to see who bites. And so, granted, people online, you get a lot of people who you're not going to convince of anything. But my tactic has always been, and you can see it this way with the missionaries too. Okay, the missionaries come to your door. There's an elder missionary and a guy who's just starting out. They have one who's been on the mission longer and one who's just going on the mission. There's one who's the outspoken one, and then the other is kind of mostly sitting there. And you might be talking to the guy who has responses to what you're saying, but the other guy's sitting there the whole time listening to you. And I really look at it as I'm talking to this person and they keep coming back with something, but there's all sorts of people that are watching this conversation and listening to this conversation. And I'm doing it more for them, honestly, than the person that I'm talking to.
And that's something I finally figured out a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago even, when somebody came to me in a forum where I wasn't witnessing to cults, we were discussing doctrine.
Right.
And he'd been kind of lurking as I've been advocating for my doctrinal position. And finally he said, he said to me, I have copied every single one of your comments and saved them in a file. And I had no idea this was going on. But what I really like about what you're saying is your stress on not being confrontational, because I'm finding that it seems like every day the internet becomes more of a confrontational or confrontation-oriented medium. It's so hard to avoid confrontation. You really have to work at it. It must be a challenge for you.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing I would throw out there that's very important about doing this online is don't use your personal profile. Because I have become friends on Facebook with a ton of Mormon missionaries. But I post on my People of the Free Gift, page, and then I'll share it to groups that are Christians and Mormons or Christian Jehovah's Witnesses talking with each other. And that has become a very powerful technique, because what a lot of Christians do is they make the mistake of posting something on their personal Facebook page, and they alienate half of the people and might lose friends that they don't have to. They don't have to put that confrontational stuff on their personal page. There's tons of groups out there about whatever topic you want to get on a soapbox about. And so that's a really helpful tip that I can throw out there if people are trying to share their faith online. I mean, there's nothing wrong with sharing a Bible verse on your personal page or something like that, but getting on a soapbox or posting something really controversial, I would really avoid that.
It's funny you should. This is also something I think I've gradually come around to. You have to curate your own page because of what you just said. I mean, I have very strong political views. I have very strong religious views. I have lots of.
You are kidding me.
You might. Okay, they're pretty strong, you know. And I used to really emphasize them on my Facebook page, and I had people in my own church defriending me.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I was being offensive. I thought I was just
annoying.
I was just annoying is what I was, right? So so I just stopped doing that, and I try to keep it light. I try to keep it friendly. I every once in a while, like it just occurred to me the other day, I saw something that was anti-abortion, and I put it on there. And okay, I'm sorry. This is one line. Every once in a while, I'm going to put something there that's pro-life. But I have friends who are very nice to me, and they'll say, well, I think differently. And I don't say anything to them. I just let them watch the video I posted or whatever it is. And also, I occasionally post something that's very strong, a very strong presentation of the gospel, even though I have a very good friend who's Jewish. And I notice she doesn't say anything. You know, she just kind of doesn't comment on those posts, which I don't blame her. But we can, the vast majority of my stuff I'm trying to keep so that in the other forums I can go what I've come to in the use of social media.
Yeah. We have a couple of comments. Actually, they're pretty active there today in our comment section. It's sort of fun. But T.L. Summers, who says, I love you guys. Expose the NAR. My family is caught up in some of its teachings, but I don't think they even realize it. And as we talked earlier, there are a number of people who are being caught up in the NAR without realizing it because of what I would call the good old boy network. Pastors who are less discerning than they should be, taking books and teachings from other teachers that they trust who got it from NAR teachers. The next thing that she writes is that her someone in her family's gotten involved in the Elijah list, and she's trying to back off a little bit because she doesn't want to push her mom or this person away. Is that wise to do that, to kind of play lightly on that rather than full-out confrontation?
I would say if it's somebody that's close to you and you have a relationship with, probably. For people who come out of the Mormon church, that's more likely than anything else. But it doesn't matter what group you're dealing with. I wouldn't say tread so lightly that you never bring it up. But I guess really what it comes down to is you got to listen to the Holy Spirit and what He's leading you to do. Because sometimes
you do, and sometimes you can talk about the group without talking about the group.
Yes.
You know, I had some years ago, I had a guy, he was an atheist, that wanted us to get his wife out of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And my first question to him was, well, what are you going to take her to? I mean, just to get her out of one group is not helpful because she still has the spiritual hunger. So then he was pretty insistent, and he brought her, and he lied to her to get her there, which made me very uncomfortable. And so as we met, and she was, arms crossed, she was not happy to be there. And so I started talking to him about the existence of God instead. He was very frustrated because he wanted me to get her out of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And my wife and I then started talking about other groups. Never talked about the Jehovah's Witnesses once. But every single teaching was a Watchtower teaching, just from a different group. She ended up leaving the Watchtower a week later because it bothered her all week long that she knew these groups were cults. And if they believed the same thing she believed, she must be in a cult. Yeah,
I've heard stories like that where a Jehovah's Witness meets a Mormon and they they're talking to each other, and both of them end up leaving their faith because they realize that they're both in a cult. So
Right.
It's interesting.
Right. So yeah, with family, it becomes difficult because you don't want to separate the family relationship, and yet you have a desire to reach the one that you love. I have several families I'm working with now, and I kind of try to use a soft touch to say, you need to really understand your faith. So let's get you trained, and then you can kind of use what I might call coffee and a question. Ask, just drop a question, and you don't really care if they answer it right now because they have to answer for themselves. They don't have to answer it for you. So you're not going to ask the question and stare at them waiting for the answer. Ask the question and then offer them a cup of coffee. Offer them a bagel. You want another bagel? You need butter with the bagel, and let it go from there. And the Holy Spirit has some amazing ways of using that kind of information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Ron, can you fit in another commercial here?
I will give it a shot here. Let's, oh boy, what is that? That is really weird. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. At the Bible Buffet, everything is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, truth claim-free, and all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. This week's regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. Yes, the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience.
The Church of Smorgasbordianism, one of my favorites.
Yes.
So, the book. You want to hold up the book?
It's part of their seeker sense. It's part of their seeker sensitive outreach.
Seeker sensitive outreach. That's right. Yes. And who publishes it?
It's published through Amazon.
You took it away before I could really get a good look.
Okay. Hold it up and talk.
Hold it up and talk. Right. Otherwise.
So it's published through Amazon, but it's available if you go through online like Barnes & Noble and those places. But if you go through Amazon, it helps me out more than if those other sources who take the extra dime away. But so you can get it paperback or Kindle. And the other thing I'm throwing out for most of your listeners are probably part of churches, but if you set up a small group Bible study based off of it, I'm making it as simple as you send me the questions, the time frame that you're looking at, and then order for books and whatever donation, and I will make videos that are custom to the questions that you're wanting answered. So I'm finding that's the most productive way to deal with this topic, because everybody has that person they have in mind and that particular group that they have in mind. And this is a pretty big book, so how to pick what to cover and what not to cover. Basically, I want to leave it up to you. So if you do that, I will send a free copy of the digital copy of the book to you. And you can hop over to the YouTube channel, People of the Free Gift, or the Facebook page by the same name. And those are the two best ways to get a hold of me. And if you have any personal questions, you can hop on there as well. And I'd be glad to help out.
Now, also for those who are watching, this isn't just that you wrote a book. You actually are a pastor currently. Yes,
I'm a pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church in Roundup, Montana. And so oftentimes I was going to say that when I record my sermons for YouTube, I will mention groups and things and get into some of the issues more directly, whereas on Sunday, I'll refer to it more vaguely. And let people who are in the know, they know what I'm talking about. And so I'm a pastor, And so on my YouTube channel, I also have all my sermons and also some fun stuff about Star Wars as well. So,
Star Wars guy, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So that's why the Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Nobody Wants to Know Me kind of hit you. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Luke, I am your father.
I'm your father.
Okay. So enough with that. This is important because there's this kind of idea that many Christians get of there is the surefire technique to get everybody out of whatever false group they're in. I call it the silver bullet syndrome, and I get this a lot where someone will call me and say, I have a Mormon coming over in 1 hour. What verse do I give them to get them out? Or I have a Jehovah's Witness coming over tonight to do a book study. What do I tell them to get them out?
You can really gauge their priorities by that kind of an opening line, can't you?
Well, I don't know. I used to feel that way probably more than I do today, because the fact that they are calling me tells me that they are at least concerned enough to want to try to do something. They haven't been equipped, whether it is their own fault they're not equipped or because the church they're going to doesn't do a good job of teaching, or something in between there I don't have access to. I used to want to say when I got those calls, you are cult bait. You are too biblically illiterate to talk to them. Just tell them to come back in a month after you have time to study. I never did that. But then over time, as I thought about it, I realized, everyone's really busy. And priorities, maybe Ron's a little bit right there. Our priorities largely are driven by whatever pops up for us today. So my priority today, I may want to learn more about Mormons because our friend is a Mormon, but my car breaks down. And so what is my priority now? Getting my car working. Or my son is sick, or my wife is having a bad day, or, my job asked me to work overtime, or whatever. So we have a lot of what we might call the tyranny of the urgent, which prevents us from spending good time studying. In some ways, I feel like Tevye Fiddler on the Roof. I actually get to do what the rabbis do that he only dreams of wanting to do. To sit with the rabbis and kick around theology and if I were a rich man kind of a thing. So I tend to try to not be hard on people these days, because I realize they're doing the best they can with what they've got, and I want to try to help them. And so if they're close by and I get a call like that, we usually can find someone to go and be with them. That's a way to help. The second thing is to help them understand there's not a silver bullet. It isn't a one size fits all. There is you and how you handle information. There is the person you're talking to and how they hear information. And then there's a dynamic of how you exchange that information between each other. So for someone like me, I like dealing with what does the Bible say? I'm really good with that. And I am more comfortable using a New World Translation with a Jehovah's Witness than I am another translation, only because I don't want to spend my time arguing over whose translation is better.
Yeah.
Right? My wife is really, really good with Watchtower history. She's got a whole, what we call a folder file that she carries with her on every topic that could possibly come up. And so when she raises an issue, she has the Watchtower to prove what she's talking about. She's really good with that. And that's her personality. If it's somebody who has family in there, it's more of a, like I said, coffee and a bagel, a question. It's touch and go, because you want to maintain the relationship without scaring them away.
Yeah. And I would say, for the person who's wanting that last minute, prep, my book is kind of designed for that. I'm not really expecting that a whole lot of people are going to buy it, sit down, read it page 1 to the end, like they would any other book, but it's more of a reference book in that sense, that a person could have on the shelf and then have that, knock at the door kind of thing, and then have some prep time, go to the chapter on that group, learn a little bit of information, and then go in and get a little bit of basic information. There's indexes in the back, and scripture index, topical index for that very purpose, so that if something comes up, then they go, oh, I don't know the answer to that. Make an appointment for next time, read up a little bit on it, find some scriptures, what the Bible actually says about that thing, and then they come back for more. And so it's really designed with that intent and purpose, that most people don't have, the years and years that, you and I have put into knowing all the ins and outs about these different groups. And really, I think in a large measure, it's not necessary. It may help to have context. The more you know, the more context you have, and the more you might have as going on in your mind. And, oh, that's what they really mean when they say that. But asking the question is just as good. Hey, what do you mean by that when you said that word? And so anybody can do that. And the goal really is to get them to think about what they're talking about, because they'll come out with the what they heard in the Watchtower, what they heard at General Conference. They'll just be reciting stuff at first until you ask enough clarifying questions to where they don't have the reference for that. And then they actually have to think for themselves.
And although you say your book is actually designed to help the person who might be caught in a last minute situation, needs quick answers, but you also encourage, if I understand you correctly, you encourage and promote the long-term approach of building the relationship, right?
Yes.
So it's not like, okay, now I only have one shot at this.
No.
It's like, right. So, and why don't you hold the book up again? We want to sell it for you and talk so that we can see it.
Okay. And so most of what you need to know about the whole silver bullet thing is that the average LDS person, they say between the point where they have the first doubt in their mind to the point in which they actually leave the LDS church is about an average of 5 years. So you're not dealing with the typical, I'm out street witnessing and I'm going to share the gospel and that person's going to drop to their knees and repent right in front of me. If you're expecting that, you're expecting the wrong thing. You are dealing with mind control. You're dealing with dependence. You're dealing with fear. You're dealing with real stuff. You're dealing with heavy theology and emotional and relational commitment.
Sometimes you're dealing with family loss. If they leave, they could lose their whole family.
Absolutely. They could lose their family. The bishops could counsel their family to divorce them. They could lose their job if they're in Utah. They could lose a lot. I know people who had to they felt like they had to leave Utah in order to get away from the aftermath of them leaving the church.
Well,
so
didn't we hear that?
Real consequences.
Didn't we hear that at the conference? Didn't Sandra Tanner say something like that? Absolutely. In fact,
for us, we've seen that happen more times than I can even count. I had one. It was a couple. She was a fourth generation Jehovah's Witness, and she and her husband both left and with their kids. She lost 84 family members the day she left the Watchtower. That's a hard decision to make.
Yeah,
it is.
My friend Joan Centenar, when she and her husband, who worked at Bethel, left the Watchtower, she walked away from a $2 million inheritance. So not only did she lose her family, her mother and her father and brothers and sisters, she lost a lot of money in the process.
Wow. And so Kenneth Engels, I think he wrote the book called "What's Gone Wrong with the Harvest," which was a book on evangelism. I heard him give a lecture. This is 30 years ago, and he says, one of the things he studied, I think he was basically a sociologist, and he said when people make small decisions like which toothpaste to buy, they're going to not take too long to make those. When they make bigger decisions, like which car to buy, which house to buy, that's going to take a longer time. When you're asking a person what kind of, to make a decision on which their eternal destiny might hang or does hang, you got to expect them to take an even longer time. You would want them to take some time to really put some deliberation into it. So yeah, 5 years, I'd like it to go quicker than that. Anything can happen. You can wind up, in eternity within the next day, but it's understandable. So, Sharing Jesus with the Cults by Jason Oakes. You need to get the book.
Ron, you want to walk us out of here?
Yes, I do. Not, totally enthusiastic about it, but our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just in Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormons archives manager is Polygamous. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yod Leg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes from Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Piece of Me. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew a Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for its content, but you'll never prove that in a court of law.
Never. You know that, Jason? Never prove that in court of law. All right, guys. Thank you, Jason, for being with us. And we trust people will go out and buy your book, and they can contact you. They can contact us. There's a lot of good help out there. Someone just mentioned, I saw that they live in the same city as Matt Slick, and his website is CARM, C-A-R-M. They do a good job. There's a lot of good stuff out there. So,
CARM.org.
All right. Talk to you all later.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, guys.